Hi, and welcome to our new chapter here on random forests. So I will begin in this session to introduce what the bagging algorithm actually does. So bagging is for Bootstrap aggregation, and it's a preliminary version of the random forest, but can be applied to any type of machine learning model. So we'll discuss the basic idea of bagging here in this session, then explain, that it's based on bootstrapping. I guess that's already in the name. And then we'll also, try to understand a bit more why this actually improves predictive performance, especially if we apply bagging on top of somewhat random, unstable learning algorithms. Okay, so already explained the name. So the B in bagging is for bootstrapping, and the egging is for aggregation. So it's really easy to explain how this works. So the general idea is to create an ensemble method. It's the simplest ensemble method out there in machine learning. So the idea is to create multiple ML models, fit them on somewhat similar data generated from the training data, and by that idea to hopefully improve their predictive performance somehow. Okay, and how that specifically works, I'll explain here for bagging, and we'll see multiple other instances of ensemble methods like boosting, like stacking, and so on in other parts of the lecture. So the individual machine learning models that the ensemble is created from, they're usually called base learners, and they are so-called homogeneous ensembles that always use the same class, the same type of base learners. So for example, a card tree, and that's exactly what we're going to use later on when we construct a random forest. But there are also heterogeneous ensemble methods that can actually combine different types of base learners, which will then also usually have various degrees of predictive performance, and that we usually have to handle specifically. Bagging is a homogeneous method. So we'll always create similar models in our bagging algorithm because we'll always apply the same type of base learning algorithm. On the other hand, it is a so-called model agnostic technique, so we can use bagging together with any type of model, at least technically. We'll discuss at the end of this session where it actually makes the most sense and where it's maybe not so useful. So how does this work? As an algorithm, it's actually fairly simple. You can basically explain this on one slide. I guess I'm trying to do that here. I guess that's the training algorithm here on one slide for bagging. So what we do is we take our original training data set D, which you can also see here, and we fix a size of the ensemble. So our ensemble, our resulting ensemble, should be of size capital M. That's how many models we want to generate in the end. So what we will now do is that we will generate capital M bootstrap samples of our original training data set D to generate some variation in our data. So we take our original data set and then we simply will draw M bootstrap variations of that original data set, which means we will draw with replacement from the original data set. So draw an observation, draw another observation, draw another observation, but with replacement until we have sampled n of these. So until we have sampled as many as we had before in the original data set. And then on each of these bootstrapped data sets, I'll simply fit my base learning algorithm and create a model, okay? And then I'll store these models. That's really it. There's not much more to say about the training algorithm. If you haven't seen bootstrapping before, let's maybe discuss the sampling with replacement a little bit. Well, if we sample with replacement, what's going to happen? There is a certain possibility that some of the observations from the original training data set will be sampled multiple times, right? So I guess you should be able to see this here through the colors. So this guy is sampled twice here in this data set. And I guess this here is also sampled twice, but can happen multiple times, right? All of the points that we have sampled for a specific set in a specific bootstrap iteration, we would call them in bag. So that in the bag, we sampled them. And because we can sample points multiple times, there will be also certain points we will not sample. And these points are called out of bag. So maybe I guess we can also check that visually. So if we, for example, look at this thing here, what have we not sampled? I guess this here would be out of bag for, yeah, the first Bootstrap. Okay, that's just a little bit of terminology. Now, how do we predict with an ensemble? That's even simpler. Or how do we predict with a bagging ensemble, I should say? Well, we take our new observation X, we push it into each of the ensemble members, we create a prediction. Yeah, and here I'm looking at regression to start with the simplest case. Then I get capital M predictions and I just average them. And that's it. Here's the algorithm as pseudocode. I will really not read that out now because it is so simple. We have already discussed that. There's nothing new in the training phase. And the only thing I did here for the prediction phase, which is I just made this more detailed and more explicit for what happens in classification, which is always a little bit more annoying because you have these different types of outputs. So you could have trained hard labeling base learners, which output discrete classes. You could have trained something that predicts decision scores, or you could have trained something that predicts probabilities. And from these different variations, you might now construct the same types of outputs for your resulting ensemble. So there's a bunch of different ways of aggregating things now. So if you, for example, have decision scores, well, that's basically like in a regression model. So you just average them as before. If you have produced hard labels in your base learners, you can count over the ensemble. And and then you can do majority voting. So you would predict the class that is predicted by most of the ensemble members. But you could also count again over these hard labels and then count proportions, and you might treat that as a probability estimate for your ensemble if you want to produce probabilities. Or maybe you have trained probabilistic classifiers and then you can average their values to get a resulting probabilistic classifier for your ensemble. So I'll not go into more details here. Most of these things work very similarly, fairly easy to understand, and in terms of performance differences, they are not large. Okay, so it's a bit unclear which of these is better. Why or when does bagging help? So what's the reason that this might be a good technique? So the whole idea behind this, and we'll explore this a little bit later in more detail when I introduce the complete random forest. So the idea behind bagging is that it should reduce the variability of our predictions because we average over them, we smooth out, right? When we create these ensembles and then we average in prediction. That's a smoothing procedure. It's the oldest trick in the book of statistics. If anything is like of too high variance, we run it multiple times and we average. So this is particularly effective if large parts of the prediction error of our underlying base learners is usually due to that instability and often due to some randomness, some random noise in that learning procedure. So what you can see here is I've created a bunch of different decision trees, very often combine bagging with decision trees because decision trees are somewhat unstable as a learning algorithm. We have learned that before. And I'm now creating here different bagging ensembles based on trees for different sizes, right? And here on the y-axis, you can see the resulting MSE on the regression task that I'm applying that to. And you can see how that goes down when ensemble size goes up. On this plot, you can see the underlying data distribution. As you can also see the true function that I've sampled from. So again, something like a sinusoidal curve. And here you can see the predictions of the individual trees as these greenish confidence areas here in the background. You can also see the mean of the bagged ensembles. And so usually this reduction of variance is a good thing. Also in terms of smoothes out the response surface, it usually results in a reduction in prediction error. And the larger the ensemble, the better this usually works. up to a point, and the optimal ensemble size usually depends on the specific learning algorithm you're using, and also obviously depends on the data distribution. Here's a small benchmark. So we bagged ensembles with about 100 base learners here. I used the SPAM dataset, which we've also seen before, and I'm applying that on top of logistic regression, which is a somewhat stable learning algorithm. So there's not too much instability, random variation in that algorithm. There is the card algorithm. That is somewhat unstable. You can see that here. Using bagging on top of that improves the results by quite a large margin, although the specific configuration of the card algorithm here doesn't seem to work too well in comparison to our logistic regression model, and also in comparison here to a k-nearest neighbor algorithm. And that depends a little bit on the setting of the k. So you use the medium setting here for k, for the number of nearest neighbors. But both of these, so the logistic regression and the k-nearest neighbor, they are somewhat improved by bagging, but not too much, which is because they are a bit more stable. So for specifically true for the logistic regression, but for the k and n, it depends a bit on the setting of the k. So for smaller k's, it will become a bit more unstable, and for larger k's, it will be a bit more stable. Bagging is also quite often applied to neural networks, often fitted through randomized optimization procedures like a stochastic gradient descent. And if you then fit your neural network on a smaller data set, which might happen, not every data set is large scale, and for some reasons you might still prefer to run a neural network procedure, and then very often some form of bagging is applied there to stabilize the resulting ensemble. Sometimes they only do this even over different seeds. They might not even bootstrap the data set. Okay, this concludes our introductory session here. I'll stop now, and I hope to see you again in the next session, where I will then really introduce the random forest. Bye-bye.